Welcome back, children, to the second video of the story, The Portrait of a Lady. When my parents were comfortably settled in the city, they sent for us, which means that when my parents they settled down in the city, then they called both of us, that is my grandmother and myself. That was a turning point in our friendship. So that time when they were called from the village to settle down in the city along with my parents, that was the point that turned around our friendship. That means it changed the friendship, the strong bond of friendship that we shared, that is my grandmother and myself. Although we shared the same room, my grandmother no longer came to school with me. So in the city also they shared the same room. Both of them were in the same room, but now the grandmother did not accompany the author to the school. I used to go to an English school in a motor bus. There were no dogs in the streets, and she took to feeding sparrows in the courtyard of a city house. So now Khushwant Singh, he was going to an English school, and he did not go walking by foot to that school, but he went in a motor bus. And then there were no dogs in the streets, so she started feeding the sparrows in the courtyard of the house in the city. As the years rolled by, we saw less of each other. So as the time passed, as the years passed on, they saw lesser and lesser of each other. That means they spent lesser time with each other compared to the time they spent in the village. For some time, she continued to wake me up and get me ready for the school. So he says that for some time she continued to wake him up and get him ready for the school. When I came back, she would ask me what the teacher had taught me. So when he came back from the school, she used to always ask me what the teacher had taught him that day. I would tell her English words and little things of Western science and learning. So he used to tell her what he had learned, the English new words he had learned, and the various concepts of the Western science and learning. The law of gravity, Archimedes' principle, the world being round, etc. So he discussed with her all what he learned in the school about physics, the law of gravity, Archimedes' principle, and about the world being a round circle. This made her unhappy. So she was not very happy with what he told her about the science and technology, the discoveries, the inventions. She could not help me with my lessons. She did not believe in the things they taught at the English school and was distressed that there was no teaching about God and the scriptures. Now why was his grandmother unhappy? Because she could not help him with his lessons. She did not have the knowledge that he was getting at the school. Secondly, she did not believe many of the things that were taught to him in the English school, and main thing that really upset her was that no teaching about God and the holy scriptures was done at school. That disturbed her a lot. One day I announced that we were being given music lessons. She was very disturbed. So one day when Khushwant Singh came back home, he told his family members that in school they are going to teach them music. Now this really disturbed his grandmother a lot. To her, music had lewd associations. Lewd means vulgar. So for her, music was very vulgar. Music was played by only the very base people. It was the monopoly of harlots and beggars and not meant for gentlefolk. Now harlots are prostitutes and gentlefolk are the people belonging to noble families, good honorable families. So monopoly means a control. So according to her, the music was something to be divulged in by the harlots, the prostitutes, and by the beggars. It was not meant to be involved for the gentlefolk, for the honorable, respectable people to get play music and to take interest in music. That was the old ideology. She said nothing, but her silence meant disapproval. She did not say anything, but she was silent, and a silence meant that she did not approve of it. She did not like this idea of him learning music. She rarely talked to me after that, and after this incident, she hardly spoke with Khushwant Singh. When I went up to university, I was given a room of my own. The common link of friendship was snapped. Snapped means it was cut. So he says that when I went to the university, I was given a single room, and that time the common bond of our friendship, it was cut short. It was broken. My grandmother accepted her seclusion with resignation. Seclusion means to be alone, to be spend time alone. Resignation means when you accept things which are something which is not desirable, which you don't want to accept. But she had no other option. She accepted being the alone without making much fuss about it. It was undesirable, but she did accept it. She rarely left her spinning wheel to talk to anyone, and after this she did not leave her spinning wheel, which is the charkha, to talk to anyone. All the time she was spinning the wheel and making thread out of it, and she did not speak to anyone. From sunrise to sunset, she sat by her wheel spinning and reciting prayers. So from morning, from the time of sunrise till sunset in the evening, she sat at a spinning wheel, and she was saying her prayers, repeating the prayers very softly in her mouth. Only in the afternoon she relaxed for a while to feed the sparrows. So in the afternoon she would take a little time off from the spinning wheel and saying her prayers, and she fed the sparrows which came in the courtyard. While she sat in the veranda breaking the bread into little bits, hundreds of little birds collected round her, creating a veritable bedlam of chirrupings. So in the afternoon, when she took a little time off, what did she do? She just sat in the veranda, the area just outside the house, which was covered. There was a roof above it, and she broke the bread into small bits to be given to the birds, and then hundreds of little birds, hundreds and hundreds of them, they collected around her, creating a veritable means a real bedlam of chirrupings. Bedlam is making a lot of noise, and chirruping is the noise of the bird. So there were hundreds of those birds sitting around her, making a lot of noise, chirruping away. Some came and perched on her legs. Perched means when the bird sits, that is perched. So some of the birds came and they sat on her legs, others on her shoulders, and the other birds, they also sat on her shoulders. Some even sat on her head. She smiled but never shooed them away. And some even, they loved to sit on her head. So they were on her legs, her shoulders and her head. She just smiled and she never tried to shoo them off, to just try to put them off to go away from here. It used to be the happiest half hour of the day for her, and she enjoyed this half an hour the most. It was the happiest half an hour of the day for my grandmother. When I decided to go abroad for further studies, I was sure my grandmother would be upset. So after his university, he decided to go abroad to pursue his further studies, and he was sure that his grandmother is not going to like it. She would be upset with this idea. I would be away for 5 years, and at her age, one could never tell. So if he went there abroad, he would be there at least for 5 years to complete his education, and she was so old, and at this age, you could never say what may happen to a person. But my grandmother could. She was fine. She was absolutely fine. She was not even sentimental, but she did not show any kind of emotions when he told her that he was going abroad. She came to leave me at the railway station but did not talk or show any emotion. So she even accompanied Khushwant Singh to the railway station to see him off. And at that time also she did not talk to him, nor did she show any kind of feelings of being separated from her grandson. Her lips moved in prayer, her mind was lost in prayer. So all the time that she was there at the railway station seeing him off, her lips were continuously moving, saying her silent prayers, and her mind was lost in those prayers. Her fingers were busy telling the beads of her rosary. Telling the beads means softly moving the beads of a rosary, saying the prayers. Silently, she kissed my forehead, and when I left, I cherished the moist imprint as perhaps the last sign of physical contact between us. So, just before he left, she just kissed him on his forehead, and the moist imprint, the moist impact that her lips had on his forehead, that was something which the author always cherished. He always kept it as a beautiful memory of his grandmother, which was maybe the last sign of their physical contact between the two of them. But that was not so. But that is not what happened, because it was not the last physical contact. He thought that maybe when he comes back after 5 years, the grandmother may not be alive. After 5 years, I came back home and was met by her at the station. So after 5 years, when the author came back home, the grandmother came to welcome him at the station. She did not look a day older. She still had no time for words, and while she clasped me in her arms, I could hear her reciting her prayers. So when he saw her after 5 years, she still looked the same. She had not grown a day older, because already her hair was totally white. She had a crisscross of wrinkles all over her face. She was bent. So she looked the same. And when she clasped, that is, she held him tightly or embraced him in her arms, he could still hear her softly reciting, means saying her prayers in her mouth, softly. Even on the first day of my arrival, her happiest moments were with her sparrows, whom she fed longer with frivolous rebukes. So even on the first day, when he came back after 5 years, when he reached home, the happiest moments that were spent by his grandmother were feeding the sparrows, feeding them, enjoying it. And now she spent more time with them. She took longer time to feed them with frivolous rebukes. Frivolous rebukes means light-hearted scoldings. In the evening, a change came over her. But in the evening, there was a change in her. She did not pray. She collected the women of the neighborhood, got an old drum, and started to sing. So this was the change in her. For the first time, she did not say her prayers. She collected all the women of the neighborhood, all the women living nearby. She took her old drum and started beating the drum, playing the drum, and started singing. For several hours she thumped the sagging skins of the dilapidated drum and sang of the homecoming of the warriors. So for many hours she kept on beating the sagging. Sagging means the skin of the broken down, that is the dilapidated, worn out drum which was sagging, which was sinking inside. She went on beating it and sang the songs about the homecoming of the warriors. We had to persuade her to stop to avoid overstraining. Overstraining means from overdoing something and getting tired. So he says that we had to stop her, that she should avoid getting overtired. That was the first time since I had known her that she did not pray. So he says this was the first time in my life that I had seen her, my grandmother, not saying her prayers. The next morning she was taken ill, and as a result next morning she had overstrained herself that she got sick. It was a mild fever, and the doctor told us that it would go. So she was suffering from a light fever, and the doctor said that she would be fine very soon. But my grandmother thought differently. She told us that her end was near. But the grandmother, as many of the old people, are able to foresee their end. So she thought differently. She told us that she is going to die. Her end has come. She said that since only a few hours before the close of the last chapter of her life she had omitted to pray, she was not going to waste any more time talking to us. And then she informed the family now that she is very close to her death. It was the last chapter of her life, and in that last chapter, the few moments that were left, she had stopped praying. So now she did not want to waste any more time talking to us, but she wanted to spend time praying to God. We protested. We told her not to do so, but she ignored our protests. But she did not listen to us. She lay peacefully in bed praying and telling her beads. So she kept lying down in her bed. She was doing her prayers and she was moving the beads of her rosary. Even before we could suspect, her lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. He said we didn't even realize, even before we realized, her lips stopped saying, they stopped moving, saying the prayers. The rosary fell from her fingers as she lay dead. A peaceful pallor spread on her face and we knew she was dead. Pallor means a very pale appearance, but that pale appearance was very peaceful. And then it is then that they realized that she was no more. We lifted her off the bed and, as is customary, laid her on the ground and covered her with a red shroud. So he says that we lifted her from the bed, and as it is a custom, it is a ritual that the dead body is always laid on the ground, and they covered her dead body with a red colored cloth, that is the shroud. The cloth which is used to cover a dead body is the shroud. After a few hours of mourning means crying at her death, at the loss of a senior-most member of the family, they cried and showed regret. We left her alone to make arrangements for her funeral. So after mourning, they left her alone to make the arrangements for her funeral. In the evening, we went to her room with a crude stretcher to take her to be cremated. Then in the evening, they took a crude, which is a stretcher made up of bamboo poles, and they put her body on that in order to take her to the cremation ground for her last rites, that is for her cremation. The sun was setting and had lit her room and veranda with a blaze of golden light. So at that time in the evening, the sun was setting over the horizon, and her room as well as the veranda outside her room, it was blazing or shining with the light of the golden light of the sun. We stopped halfway in the courtyard. So as they carried her dead body on the stretcher, they stopped halfway through the courtyard, all over the veranda and in her room, right up to where she lay dead and stiff, wrapped in the red shroud. Thousands of sparrows sat scattered on the floor. Now, why did they stop in the veranda? Because just outside the veranda in her room, right up to the point where her dead body lay, which was stiff, it had become very cold and stiff, and it was wrapped in that red colored cloth. Thousands of sparrows were scattered all over the floor. There was no chirruping. They did not make any noise. There was no sound of chirruping. We felt sorry for the birds, and my mother fed some bread for them. So even the birds could feel the sadness. They were also grief-stricken at the loss of the grandmother. That is why they made no noise, no chirruping, nothing. So they felt really bad for the birds. So the author's mother, she went to the kitchen and she got some bread for them. She broke it into little crumbs. Crumbs are small pieces, the way my grandmother used to, and threw it to them. So she got the bread, she broke the bread into small pieces, and she threw them in the courtyard for the birds to eat. The sparrows took no notice of the bread. But the sparrows, they were grief-stricken. They did not even notice the small pieces of the bread which had been thrown to them. When we carried my grandmother's corpse off, corpse means the dead body. That is, when we carried the grandmother's dead body, they flew away quietly. All the birds, all the sparrows, they flew away into the air from the courtyard. Next morning, the sweeper swept the breadcrumbs into the dustbin, and in the next morning, it was the sweeper who was sweeping the floor. He collected all the broken pieces of bread and threw them into the dustbin. So even the birds, they were really sad at the death of the grandmother. Hope you've understood this story, and next video will be on the poem Photograph. Thank you.